Uh-oh guys, this one might not have been as good as people were making it out to be. If you don't already know, I would class myself as a fan of the Doom franchise. Played all the games and I have my own views, and while some of my opinions don't line up with the majority of them, I wouldn't say that any of my views are that outlandish. And I think that this is probably the first time I'm going to say something about a Doom game that genuinely gets me some major backlash. So, instead of what I was gonna do, which was make a 10 to 15 minute video ripping this game apart, I'm trying to spin it in something that really adds to my outlook on this, taking my game development knowledge and, trying to add a positive spin, giving them some real critique this time around, as well as tell you what I would try to approach first when changing this if I had control over the project. Yes, I'm aware it's not this easy, but it's a hypothetical, so run with me for a bit. So I'm not going to talk about how differently this game plays to 2016 and Doom Eternal, because honestly I don't think the change in style is necessarily that bad. It's just that what they've done with this makes this game feel really hollow. First off, the game in itself I think is fine. I think if this was a standalone title, it probably would have had some interesting points and would have gotten some good reviews. But the simple fact is that it's not. And because it's not, this game now has to try to keep pace with two games that have won Game of the Year and were outstanding when they were released, and still are today. Through this, I'll be talking about a collection of mechanics and the way they're handled in this game, so if you're not looking for a technical analysis, then this probably isn't the video for you, in all honesty. But if you're interested at how I look at games and all of the parts that make this game mesh together really well, then I might have some things to say that are a little enlightening. And the first issue is I don't have any inherent problems with them including a shield in a game like Doom, but when it's handled the way it is in this game, I'm sorry, but this ain't it, man. This game relies way too heavily on the shield to bring unique combat situations through the rest of the game. There's maybe one or two enemies that I can think of in the entire game that actually make you adapt, but it's purely because they're disruptive rather than interesting or fun. You need to create enemies or mechanics that don't rely purely on the parry mechanic to keep them interesting. Enemies that aren't immediately countered by throwing it at them. The bullet hell mechanics work if you actually work them between enemies that aren't that. What I would point out immediately is the way that something like the Hell Knight complements the imps in Doom 2016. Because of how strong the Hell Knight is, it makes you retreat and dodge their attacks while needing to be aware enough of your surroundings that you're not blindsided by other enemies. It makes you change the way you approach the fight in a way that feels natural, where in Doom the Dark Ages, the Hell Knight is no different than cannon fodder, and once again relies purely on the parry mechanic to completely ignore the damage they can output. Let's put this into a gameplay scenario, shall we? How do you deal with the Mancubus? Well, you wait for them to attack and you parry with the shield. How do you deal with the Revenant? Well, again, you wait for them to attack and then parry with the shield. Okay, but what about the imp guys? Those are a little bit more interesting. Well, you can shoot them in the head, or you can wait for them to attack and parry them with the shield. Okay, then what about the enemies with the shield that you can't just one-shot? Well, you shoot them once, and then you throw your shield at them, and they all explode and kill everything around them. And that's what I mean. Whether it be combat, exploration, or puzzles, everything is focused around the shield. There's no room to play around with any of your weapons because you just don't need them. In fact, the only places that you don't have to rely on the shield is the overly flawed alternate gameplay sections, and that's purely because you don't have access to it. And even in both of those sections, you're still met with the green projectile means you win. Fights in this game rely so heavily on the shield that I've been able to do entire fights without paying attention to WAS and or D. The first and biggest issues I can think to point out with this game is how they handled the mech and dragon sections. Not only because the mech sections are incredibly uninteresting, but also because they feel kind of forced. The mech sections honestly just need a complete overhaul, or if it's too much for them to do that, then just remove them. Not only do they serve no purpose in the story outside of, hey guys, here's a cool mech scene, but the only place I had any real interest in was what was happening at the very end versing the boss. The dragon sections, on the other hand, are a different story. While they're still frustrating, they show potential, not because of the main gameplay. but because of some of the side content. Chasing the demon ships around was probably the most interesting moments in the game. Weaving through the tight corridors trying to take out ships actually made me pay attention to what was going on, but the issue is that it was only side content that didn't really seem to unlock anything, and none of the chase moments were actually used as a main objective. I like the design of the creatures themselves, but whoever thought of pulling the player into a predestined position and then having them dodge one of 4 ways? Look at Halo Reach, look at Ratchet & Clank 2, I mean shit, even Battlefront 2 from 2005. Do some research on other shooters that have space combat sections. Take into account whether what you're implementing in the game feels too disjointed, and really ask, what unique thing can this add? And the turret sections are fine, it just doesn't really seem to add anything. Outside of the fact that it's probably the only section in normal gameplay that doesn't rely entirely on the shield. There's enemies that show up here that explode when enough damage is dealt to them, like the exploding possessed in the early levels of Doom 2016. But these select sections are the only point where I can remember them actually showing up. You should be using these enemies as a way to cut down large swaths of enemies and to draw the player's eye, giving the player a reason to actually use their guns instead of the shield first, unlike the lines of shielded enemies that explode when you throw your shield at them. The levels themselves aren't 100% the issue. In fact, I think some of the more linear sections are actually quite well thought out. It's more the enemy placement and the pseudo-open levels that I have the biggest issue with. Because of the developers' over-reliance on shield mechanics, the level design ends up mirroring this, where in past games, shielded enemies would appear sporadically to break up the relentless assault you're able to output. In this, you see large lines of shields, not to stop you from progressing, but instead to give an extra vulnerability to the already weak set of enemies. My first point to change would be the way that these shielded opponents are placed. Have these lines of shields at the beginning to teach the player how to use them efficiently in combat, before later on spacing them out far more, giving the players a reason to actually aim their attacks and allow more options for mid-combat outside of, oh, I've been hit, I guess I'll run away for 2 minutes. Next would probably be my approach to the overall environment. There are quite a few moments where things in the background are set up to be large enemies for a little bit later in the level, or set up context for what's about to happen, but these either draw too much attention to the point where their flaws become painfully obvious, or they'll be missed simply because the player's eye isn't drawn to them. A really good example of drawing the player's eye without strictly taking control away from them is the Half-Life series, particularly Half-Life 2. Valve are the experts at unforced storytelling and unseen tutorials, whether it be hinting at how to kill a zombie efficiently, or setting up the finale of the game from very, very early on. The game shows intention and care in every corner, something that I feel lacks quite a bit in Doom the Dark Ages. My last change would be to reapproach the way that players need to move around the map. Instead of giving the players a pseudo-open section and then only giving them one objective, give them an opportunity to actually do them in any order they want, or create small puzzles around the map that unlock different areas. Stop with the big holograms telling your players where everything is. They're not idiots, so stop treating them like it. They need the freedom to discover and move as they wish. A good way of telling your players where to go without forcing them down a corridor is to use lighting direction, as I spoke about in my Armored Core 6 review. Use different lighting that contrasts the look of the level instead of slapping yellow paint over walls, or, as I was saying before, using giant holograms to shout, "Hey idiot! Keys over here." One of my last points would probably be to reapproach the sound. The music is probably as good as it can be with Mick being taken out of the picture, but I do still have some grievances with it. My main one being the overwhelming amount of ambience and dead space between combat. You're kind of left wandering around in near silence, where in 2016 in Eternal, you were met with this looming thrum of anticipation that was present throughout the entire level. But now, when you wander around, you're kind of left with Pretty generic ambient background noise until you're hit with a wall of sound when combat kicks in. Even when the music kicks in, there's issues. The music is downplayed quite a bit, especially when other sound effects come into play. I was playing with the music at 100 and every other sound effect turned down to 70, and still the music was difficult to hear. Not only that, but the sound effects lack any real punch. The Super Shotgun is probably the gun that stands out the most because it has that boom that I'm really looking for in these guns. Something that sounds as powerful as it's supposed to feel, even if that isn't really what's happening in reality. When I fire a gun in this game, I want to feel like I'm firing a deadly weapon, not standing in a room full of people clapping and telling me how good this game is. So if I had control of this project and it came to sound, first, I would approach the way the guns sound, really giving that thump and power behind every shot and making them feel great to use. Then next, I would probably reapproach the way that between combat is handled. The combat music itself is fine, but I never felt any anticipation leading up to the combat itself. The movement to a more orchestral score isn't an issue in my eyes, but if you want to use that, then lean into it. Give us a steady pulse of violins between fights, distant trombones that loom in the background and make you feel like you're in danger. Just something to keep the interests that's so lacking in this title. While I don't think this is the worst game ever made, the simple fact that it all comes down to is that Bethesda and id Software are asking for 120 Australian dollars for a mediocre game at best. And just about everything in this game is underwhelming. So, if you're asking for more than the titles you released before that I think are better, then you should be giving us more. And I don't think a buggy 8-hour campaign with no side content counts as more. And if anything, the severe lack of side content or any other bonus is really starting to prove what I've been thinking was going to happen leading up to this. And hey, game developers, one more tip for you. You are supposed to balance the game, not the player. All of the people defending this title because I need to turn up the sliders, well, I did. And nothing changed. It is not my job to balance your game, so do your job. Game companies are a mess right now, and this is a perfect example. I feel, as a community, we're going to start going through a really rough time for AAA developers, mainly because a game like Expedition 33 shows just how much talent there is in these large companies when they're not being held back by production companies and investors that have no idea what it takes to make a great game. I'm hoping that even if these changes aren't taken into account and put into Doom the Dark Ages, that other developers can think about the things I'm saying. Research similar games. Take your time perfecting what you have at the foundation and really give us a good title. And above all, respect your customers. Anyway, that's all I have for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. Keep an eye out for more of these on the future, and I'll catch you in the next one.